Now, 1, 2, 3.
No. No. Ooh, that's a very nasty case of hiccups.
Welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
Hello and welcome to the Skeptic Zone, show number 37 for the 3rd of July 2009. This is Kylie Sturgess filling in for Richard and Stefan. Unfortunately, Richard seems to have the skeptic flu. Poor dear. Anyway, he'll still be joining us later in the show for the think tank, so send your best wishes to Richard. Firstly, we have Dr. Rachael Dunlop talking to Simon Singh himself. He'll be coming to Australia and touring in Adelaide and now Sydney, where I know you can get tickets from the University of Sydney website. You can hear all about his continuing legal battle with British chiropractors. Then we have my review of the new book from Richard Wiseman, 59 Seconds, Think a Little, Change a Lot, which has only just been released out in the UK. That will be followed by A Grain of Salt with Eran Segev. Now, let's get into the zone. But first, let's hear about my town here in Perth. The Australian city Perth, with a population of around 1.55 million people, has something in common with many other cities. There's crimes to be solved, people searching for missing loved ones, and cases of psychics claiming that they're the answer. Now, it's rare that the media do a story that's critical of so-called psychic investigators, and I'm personally of the opinion that most are genuinely deluded or confused into thinking that they have the ability to solve crimes, rather than just evil people. On June the 27th, the West Australian Sunday Times newspaper reported that WA detectives resorted to using a psychic medium who claims to speak to the dead in the hunt for Eran Rainey's killer, according to a new book that will be published next month. Now, the case revolves around Eran Rainey, who disappeared after a dance class at Bentley Community Centre on August the 7th, 2007. Her body was discovered a week later in a bush grave at Kings Park in central Perth. Debbie Maloney told the Sunday Times that the police gave her Mrs. Rainey's diary as an energy source, so she can perform a technique known as psychometry, where people communicate with the dead and see past, present and future events. There is a statement by the police. Yesterday, WA police spokesman Neil Stanbury declined to respond to Maloney's assertions or categorically deny that detectives involved in Operation Dargan, the investigation into Mrs. Rainey's murder, had used the services of Maloney. Instead, he issued a statement saying, WA Police does not use psychics or seek their services. However, if any person contacts police with what they believe is important information about a crime, we will consider what they have to provide. He said that police did not publicly comment about each person they spoke to as a part of their investigations. Now, whilst the Sunday Times newspaper was allowing Maloney a vehicle to tout her psychic detective claims, the daily newspaper, the West Australian, had a different story to put forward. Some of the points that they raised in the following article were reported upon last year, particularly the experiences of parent Don Spears, who is the father of one of the missing women who is suspected to be a victim of the Claremont serial killer, an unsolved inner-city case since the mid-1990s. The West Australian reported on 30th of June with, "We won't listen to psychics, Rainey's sister." The sister of murdered woman Eran Rainey has criticised a psychic who claims to have information upon her death, saying that she's trying to profit from the family's grief. Sharon Cottonhoe said that yesterday her family had not been contacted by psychic Debbie Maloney and had no interest in speaking to her about her alleged insight into the murder of Mrs. Rainey. Mrs. Cottonhoe said her family had been contacted by several psychics since Mrs. Rainey's death, but had declined their offers of help. She said she had read the extract from Maloney's new book, which addressed the Rainey case, but it had offered no new information. Mrs. Cottonhoe was upset that Maloney had used her sister's murder as a means of publicising a book. Everything she has said has been public knowledge for the last 2 years, Mrs. Cottonhoe said. We are not bothering with psychics. Unless someone comes up with something that hasn't been made public, it's really not worth listening to. The father of Claremont serial killer victim Sarah Spears also warned victims' families not to listen to psychics, saying yesterday they fed off misery and drove him to a mental breakdown. Don Spears said up to 400 psychics and clairvoyants had contacted him since Sarah disappeared on January the 27th, 1996. They had offered false information, but he had been so desperate to find his daughter that he had listened to them and often had followed their instructions. The false hope that they had created led him to have a breakdown late in 1996, when he found himself sitting in an armchair at home, ripping chunks of hair from his scalp. Mr. Spears said psychics like Maloney had never proved to be effective and just deepened the anguish experienced by the families of victims. In conclusion, the best background I can recommend is a book by Debbie Marshall on the Claremont serial killer case called The Devil's Garden. In Chapter 28 it reads as follows. A long-time skeptic, Brett Christian, who grew up in Claremont, believes that the clairvoyants have proven to be one of the biggest problems in the macro case. Either well-meaning or malicious, they add, he says, nothing more than further heartache to those already in grief. The saddest thing about their visions, they're not only usually wrong, but they are foisted on people when they are at their most vulnerable. We at the Skeptic Zone will continue to monitor the claims of Debbie Maloney, especially what she has to say with her new book.
So now joining us on the phone line from London is Simon Singh. Hello, Simon, and welcome to the Skeptic Zone.
It's my pleasure. I mean, it's good to talk to you at last, because we sort of corresponded in the past over email and so on, and I'm looking forward to getting to Australia and meeting you in person.
Yes, well, that's part of the reason why we're talking to you today, obviously, is to promote your Australian tour. You're going to be in Adelaide for the Adelaide Festival of Ideas, and we're, of course, also here to talk to you about the current libel case being brought against you by the British Chiropractic Association. I'll get onto that in a moment, Simon, but I just wanted to start off by giving our listeners that aren't that familiar with your work a little bit of detail about your career to date. You have a PhD in particle physics from Cambridge University, and you're now a very successful science writer and communicator, having produced documentaries for the BBC and written 4 books. But can you give us some idea about how you did your move from physics to science communication?
Yes, I think I always wanted to be a physicist, so I always, thought there was nothing more amazing than being able to discover the secrets of the universe. And so I did a degree in physics, I did a PhD in physics, I worked at CERN on my PhD looking for the top quark. And then I got to a point where I could just see that the people around me were that much quicker and smarter and sharper than me. And I thought, if people are going to make great discoveries, it's going to be them and probably not me. And so in my mid-20s, I decided to move out of physics research and thought, well, if I can't do physics research, then maybe the next best thing is to be able to write about it and talk about it. And so that's when I made the move first into TV. I worked on a TV series called Tomorrow's World, which I think was probably a bit like Beyond 2000. It's a very popular science magazine show on TV. Then I made documentaries. I made a documentary about Fermat's last theorem, so the most notorious problem in the history of maths. And it was a very successful program, and it was such an amazing story. It's a great mathematical story, but it's also a story about human obsession and childhood ambition and all sorts of very human things. So that's when I decided to write a book about the same subject, and since then I've been writing probably more than being involved in broadcast media.
Well, did you work much in research? You mentioned CERN that you did during your PhD, but do you ever miss doing that kind of thing?
I do because, because I'm a science journalist, I'm talking to scientists and I'm hearing about the wonderful things they're doing and you visit labs and you think, wow, this is amazing. I was back in CERN just a few weeks ago looking at the new experiments that are going to be up and running again in September. But I have tremendous fun doing what I'm doing as a science journalist. And it's sort of what I think I was supposed to do because I love, learning different ideas from different areas of science, and I enjoy thinking about different ways to make those ideas exciting and interesting to a general audience. And so I think I've just ended up doing the thing that I was supposed to do all along, perhaps. But I couldn't do what I do now if I hadn't been through that process of doing a PhD. That was a tremendous insight into how science works, and with a stepping stone towards what I do now. Also, things like while I was at college, I taught in South Africa for a while. I taught in India. So again, just teaching and talking to small kids about science, helped develop skills which many years later turned out to be really valuable. So this odd combination of experiences that I've had along the way have helped me become the science writer that I am today.
Yeah, it's funny actually, Simon, because I myself have a PhD in cell biology research, but I also do a lot of science communication. I do a children's show, science children's show with Richard Saunders, the producer of this podcast, and I'm starting to move into that area too. But I'm worried I'm going to miss the bench. I really do like getting in there and getting my hands dirty and making things blow up and all that sort of stuff. It's fascinating work, really fun stuff.
Yes, it is, and the great thing is you can do both. You don't necessarily have to make the leap one way or the other. But it's interesting. You say working with young children. I remember when I first wrote a book, I'd give talks in museums and bookshops, and you talk to grown-ups who were clearly interested in what you were saying because they'd walked all the way to the museum to come and hear you speak. But when you talk to school kids, half the kids in the class may not be that turned on by science. So you have to work harder to get them interested, and you develop tricks and ideas and to make the science relevant or interesting or enticing. And then you take those tricks and ideas and you present them back to the grown-ups, and the grown-ups love them just as much. So I found that the way I lecture to grown-ups has developed out of a lot of the ideas that I use when I'm trying to get kids excited about those same ideas. So we've done big theatre projects here in London, and again, a lot of the theatre ideas come out of work we've done with kids.
Yeah, that's true. We find the same thing. In fact, we do a show that we do for very young kids, sort of between the ages of sort of 5 up to 8 years old, and then we'll do it for kids in high school, and we don't have to change that much. And then we do a similar show to the high school show for adults, and they all love it.
Yeah. It sounds a little bit patronising. It sounds like we're talking to grown-ups as though they were 5-year-olds, but it's there's a demonstration which I won't describe because it's quite dangerous. I wouldn't want anybody else to repeat it, but some of these demonstrations are just amazing, whatever age you are, and they capture people's attention, and it gives you that wow moment. And then it's the questions that arise out of it. And the questions that a 5-year-old will ask will be very different from the questions that a graduate would ask or somebody else. But they're all inspired by that magical moment that suddenly brought the science alive.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned science communication and journalism as well, which is something that you do a lot of. There has been quite a lot of criticism of late of the quality of science journalism, and in particular, this is something that Ben Goldacre does a lot of. What's your opinion of the quality of science journalism in the world now? Do you think that it's under threat? It's a really complicated picture. I mean, just this week, in fact, tomorrow is the World Federation of Science Journalists, a meeting in London, and so there'll be 600 journalists from all over the world meeting to talk about different ideas in science that are emerging and the different issues confronting science journalists around the world. And
the scientists that are bothering to come to London are the specialist science correspondents, and they probably have a scientific background. They certainly care about science, and they're the best science correspondents we have. They're great, and they do a great job, and that's fantastic. The problem is when science becomes a really big story, it often gets taken out of the hands of the science correspondent and gets given to whoever's writing for the front page, or whoever the columnist is that's got the most sensational column in the newspaper, and so on. And that's when there's a concern of the science being distorted or sensationalized, or you either have on one extreme scaremongering or on the other extreme miracle cure. And that's the concern, I think, is that split between the credible science journalists who really know what they're doing, who do a fine job, and the non-specialists who often get hold of the wrong end of the stick and who are generally keen to sensationalize anyway, and who then distort the subject on important issues, whether it's genetic modification, or whether it's global warming, or whether it's swine flu or MMR or whatever. And I think there are real concerns about the way science is reported by the general non-specialist journalist.
Yes, well, MMR is a very good example of that, particularly in the UK, isn't it? I mean, that campaign has been attributed, or at least a part of it, to the fact that it was reported in the mainstream media quite incorrectly, I guess you could say. And that's resulted in a huge drop in the rate of vaccination for MMR in the UK, which, of course, is now still a problem. And, of course, it's a problem across the rest of the world, including Australia. We see it here as well.
Yes, and it was interesting to see how that all unfolded. Journalists sort of thought, well, this is such an important story. It's about parents and it's about their children, and we must get the message out there. And if MMR is dangerous, we must save these babies from this terrible harm that's being inflicted on them, and we must make parents aware of it. And suddenly the stories were splashed on the front page, and the columnist would want to have their opinion, and another columnist would say, well, my friend's a mother and her child had this or that. And it all became about personal experiences and one-off stories and anecdotes. Yes. And whichever lobby group could get access to the journalist would have the most coverage. And there was also this idea of balance, that if you have one scientist who says that there's no good evidence whatsoever to suggest that the MMR vaccine is dangerous, you have to balance that with potentially the renegade scientist, the maverick, who disagrees, or the mother with the heart-rending story on the other side. And that's not really a fair fight, because if you've got 99% of scientists saying one thing and 1% saying the other, well, from the listener's point of view, all they're hearing is a one-on-one fight between two scientists. So it looks like opinions divided. But journalists really struggle with this idea of balance, because balance, in a way, is part of the core of journalism. But if the evidence is so one-sided, I think what scientists feel is that it's unfair to represent a balance in evidence by having a balance of interviewees.
Yes, that's true. I mean, that happens in this country as well, and the 1% is a lobby group with respect to the anti-vax lobby group here. And I have spoken to journalists myself personally who are interviewing me about that issue, and they'll say, well, we have to speak to the other side, and I've tried to explain that to them, but as you say, it's very difficult for them to understand that that's the 1% fringe as opposed to the 99% of evidence. But yeah.
In Australia, is for a child to go to school, is vaccination essential?
No, it's not. It's not enforced. Children are given a book which details their vaccination schedule and whether or not they've had all their vaccinations, but there are exemptions available. Right. So it's not enforced.
Well, it's a discussion that's emerging in this country as to whether that would be a good thing or a bad thing, or how it would be enforced and so on. And I think that's a really interesting discussion that journalists and the public and teachers and parents can have, bringing their own opinion as to whether that would be effective or how it might work. But that discussion has to be based on the science and the scientific facts that we're fairly certain of. as opposed to the discussion being about the scientific facts between renegades and mavericks and lobby groups against the scientists who sort of know what they're talking about. So there's certainly a role for public discussion of the issues, but that public discussion has to be based on the best available evidence.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, I've read a little bit of coverage of that recently. There was an article written, I think it was in The Guardian, in fact, a couple of articles, and one of them was saying that there should be special schools for people that don't get their kids vaccinated by MMA.
Yes, no, that's an interesting idea.
Yeah. Anyway, let's get on to the British Chiropractic Association, Simon, which is what we want to talk about now. You are currently... Yeah, and I know there's some of this you can't discuss for legal reasons, but can you just explain briefly to our listeners about the case that the BCA has brought against you for defamation or libel?
Yes, sure. I mean, just some history first. My background is in physics, and my first 3 books were sort of about mathematics or cosmology or technology in the form of cryptography. And it was quite a jump when I moved from those kind of subjects to writing about alternative medicine. And the reason I made that jump was because I was aware of young students using homeopathy to protect themselves against malaria, which is an utterly ridiculous thing to do. But these students, who were pretty smart, were obviously being fed bad advice about the supposed claims of homeopathy. Homeopathy, there's no reason why homeopathy should protect anybody against malaria, and there's no evidence to suggest it can do either, and therefore it would be very unwise for a student to take homeopathy thinking it might protect them against malaria. But this was happening. So I did a little investigation, and a young student approached 10 homeopaths, and every single one of these 10 homeopaths was willing to give her homeopathy to protect her on what she said she was going to be going on a 10-week truck tour of West Africa. So that made me realize that there's a lot of misinformation about alternative therapies. Some of it may be potentially dangerous. Maybe there's an opportunity to investigate this and to look at the evidence for a range of alternative therapies, to talk about evidence in general. How is evidence accumulated in medicine? What is evidence-based medicine? What are clinical trials? How do they work? And what do they say about the range of alternative therapies? And so I started writing a book called Trickle Treatment, which I co-authored with Professor Edzard Ernst. Edzard is the world's first professor of alternative medicine. And so he spent the last 15 years looking at all of the evidence. And so the idea was to take his research, to take other people's research, and to tell the public about what works and what doesn't work, what's safe and what's dangerous. And the picture is complicated. You have to look at each therapy individually, because some of them actually do seem to work, and many others don't. But we've got to look at the evidence in order to decide. And when the book was published back in April 2008, I wrote a few articles, and one of the articles I wrote was about chiropractic. And
yes, because there's a whole chapter in your book, Simon, on chiropractic, isn't there?
That's right. Yes, and many people will think, well, is chiropractic really alternative? It's just spinal manipulation, and if you manipulate the spine, you'll fix somebody's back. That sounds very reasonable. It's fairly reasonable, and there's some evidence to show that chiropractors can help with back problems. I don't think it's very convincing evidence, but back problems are notoriously difficult. So, if nothing else works, then chiropractic may be what helps you. But my concern in the article was the fact that chiropractors were sometimes making claims that go beyond the back. And this goes back to their historical roots. If you go back to the invention of chiropractic by a chap called Daniel Palmer, Palmer believed he could treat anything by spinal manipulation, because the spine carried what he called innate energy through to the rest of the nervous system, through to the rest of the body. So if you were deaf, the reason you were deaf was because there was a blockage in the innate energy in your spine which wasn't getting through to your ear. And therefore, if you fix the spine, you can fix the deafness. And in fact, the first person he cured was a profoundly deaf man in America. second person he cured had serious heart disease.
Yeah.
So that's the root of chiropractic. Now, a lot of that disappeared, and most chiropractors mainly deal with back problems. But some of them still claim to treat childhood conditions like asthma, colic, ear infections, and so on. And that's where my article was really centered. I questioned the evidence on that, and the British Chiropractic Association sued me for libel.
Yes. Yeah. And so the interesting thing about this case, though, and I wanted to ask you a little bit about the libel laws in the UK as well, because they're quite different to Australia. But the interesting thing about this was when you went to court, the judge defined the word bogus, which I believe you used in your article, as a different meaning to what you intended to believe. Is that correct? Sorry, what you intended it to mean? Yeah,
I mean, just to go back one step, I mean, I think, if there was a misunderstanding, then the British Chiropractic Association were offered a right of reply in The Guardian. They had 500 words where they could have written their account or their view or shown their evidence. They were offered a clarification, but they seemed to prefer taking the legal option. So we ended up going to court, and we hadn't had the full trial yet. But before that, we had a ruling on meaning, which is you go to the High Court, and the judge says, this is what your article means, so that when we do have the trial, we know what we're arguing about. And the judge decided that I was not only saying that these treatments aren't backed by evidence, but that the chiropractors are also deliberately dishonest in using these treatments. So it's not that their interpretation of the evidence is different from mine, it's that they actively and dishonestly promote treatments that they know to be ineffective. Now, I know that's not what I meant, and I don't think that's what a reasonable interpretation of the article is, which is why we're currently appealing the judge's ruling on meaning. The judge took the phrase happily promotes bogus therapies to mean knowingly promotes fraudulent therapies. Now, a bogus therapy can mean unscientific, unproven, ineffective, all sorts of different meanings. Happily can mean innocently, blithely, unknowingly, in blissful ignorance, all sorts of different things. Now, we're arguing, and I think we're on fairly good ground, whether we win the appeal or not, I don't know, or whether we even get heard in the Court of Appeal is still debatable at the moment. But in the context of the article is very important. And earlier in the article, I call chiropractors fundamentalists. I say they have wacky ideas. And so though that sort of paints a picture of chiropractors as being fundamentalists, having wacky ideas, being eccentric, being deluded, but not being deliberately dishonest. Yes. And that's why we think the judge took an unreasonable interpretation.
Yes. Well, you have submitted your appeal, and Jack of Kent, who is a legal blogger in the UK, has been following your case very closely and blogging about updates. And I believe that the reply has come in from the BCA, and I read this on his blog just last night, and their reply is something like 26 pages to your 12 pages of defence. Is that right? Are you allowed to talk about that?
Yeah, it's slightly... this dates back, I think, to probably the end of last year. So these are legal documents that date back to last year. But Jack of Kent has just got hold of them from the court because they're public records and people can access them. And so he's talking. So I would have submitted my defence, which is why I think my article was reasonable. They then submit their reply, which is an attack on my defence. And that's a sort of basis from which a trial will sort of emerge further down the road. But as you said, I think my defence was maybe 12 pages. Their reply, I think, was possibly even 36 pages. Oh, I see. Okay. So one of the other things that's happened recently, Simon, and this isn't directly related to your case, but I wanted to ask you about it anyway, was what's become known as the chiropocalypse, which occurred recently, where the McTimoney Association of Chiropractors
sent out an email to all their members asking them to remove any reference on their websites to the fact that they treat children for colic. Do you know much about this?
I've been following it on the web. I suppose it started with somebody submitting a complaint to the Advertising Standards Authority about one chiropractor promoting chiropractic for the treatment of colic. And the Advertising Standards Authority in Britain is pretty good. They tend to look at the scientific evidence, and if the scientific evidence doesn't stand up, then they uphold the complaint. And that's what happened in this case. They said that this chiropractor should stop advertising the treatment of colic. And that happened, I think, probably in May of this year, just a few weeks ago. After that, some bloggers, skeptics, rationalists kind of got together and started submitting further complaints about chiropractors. I think partly to Advertising Standards Authority, partly to Trading Standards, partly, I think, to the General Chiropractic Council as well, that oversees chiropractors. And they seem to have done this on a massive scale. You may know more about this than me, but I think literally there have been hundreds of complaints submitted.
I think there were 175 that I read about, at least.
Well, the reaction from the chiropractors is, not surprisingly, one of shock, because now all of these chiropractors are being investigated either by Advertising Standards Authority, Trading Standards, or the General Chiropractic Council, and there's a huge spotlight being shone on chiropractors who make the sort of claims that were mentioned in my article. So while I'm sort of embroiled in a legal battle, the blogosphere has sort of been carrying on its own battle separately, which is an extraordinary achievement.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because it's a little bit like what happened with the Jenny Barnett and LBC thing with Ben Goldacre late last year, where they threatened Ben with legal action for putting up the audio of her show where she was damning the MMR. And as soon as that got out to the blogosphere, it became a Streisand effect, and of course everybody found out about it. And this is a similar sense in the fact that this email was sent to all the members of the McTimoney chiropractors saying, do not show this to anyone, do not tell your patients about this, this email is private. And of course it was then published on Quackometer, and now everybody knows about it, and it's gone global and viral.
Yes, I mean, I don't know, I'm sort of in my, for whatever reason, whether it's age-related or whatever the reason is, I'm not particularly techie. I've never really got into the web and Facebook and the blogosphere and so on. But over the last year, it's fascinating to see the power of the web in this sort of situation. So, for example, there's a Facebook group linked to the libel case, and I think we've got about 7,500 supporters now, and it's, for the last year it was quite lonely fighting this legal battle, but the support and the messages of goodwill coming out of that group have been really important for me, and I think have been a way for supporters to talk to each other and discuss issues and so on. And then things like the way the bloggers have given really informed, intelligent debate and discussion on this issue, whether it's Jack of Kent, who has a very strong legal background, to others who have a more of a scientific bent and who kind of analyse things more scientifically, or whether it's those who are more active and who actually initiate some of these things that are going on. The power of it is immense, and it's something I've only really become aware of in the last, say, 6 months as I've started to watch and monitor what's going on.
Well, in particular, Sense About Science have been critical to your campaign, which is keeping libel laws out of science. And I believe there are now, last time I checked, there were 10,000 signatures on the petition for getting the libel laws in the UK changed.
Yes, so there's my case is obviously I'm very concerned about my case and the fact that my article's being challenged under the libel system here in England. But the bigger issue is how libel in general can have a slightly scary effect, or a very scary effect, on journalists in general. And so Sense About Science has started a campaign, and I'm closely associated with Sense About Science and involved in the campaign. It's about trying to... let me put it this way. The problem with the libel laws in England are they are horrendously expensive. You could easily get a bill for $2 million at the end of a case if you lose. If you're a journalist, you're pretty much fighting an uphill battle. It's very easy for people to bring a libel suit. As a journalist, you're guilty until proven innocent. It's a reverse burden of proof in libel law in England. There's no there's no financial support for people. There's no basically you've got to fund it yourself if you're a newspaper or a publisher or a lone journalist. It's a very difficult situation. And as I say, at the end of it, if you lose, you could end up with a $2 million bill. So when somebody sues you for libel, the smart thing to do is to back out quickly and just to say sorry, retract, apologize, and get out of it. Because if you win the case, it'll take up a year of your life, and you'll probably end up losing a few $1,000s anyway, because you never recover all of your costs, and you never recover your time anyway. So winning is pretty bad, and losing is catastrophically bad. And that means that, as I say, journalists withdraw articles that often maybe don't need to be withdrawn. Journalists gut articles before they're printed, so they take out anything that might possibly be sued later on, because they don't want that risk of going to trial. And they often end up not even writing about certain subjects because the risks of being taken to court are there. And that means you end up with a press which is intimidated from the get-go. And so the idea of this campaign is to reform English libel laws. To put this into context, a libel case in England costs 140 times more than the European average.
Yeah.
There's something fundamentally wrong with our system when it's so expensive, and there's something fundamentally wrong when that vast expense terrifies journalists from writing what they really ought to be writing about. So that campaign, I think we've now got about 14,000 signatures, and as well as massive support from the public, we've got people like Stephen Fry, who I know you were talking to recently, Tim Minchin, performers and writers who care about skepticism and rationalism, scientists like Richard Dawkins and Sir Martin Rees, the Astronomer Royal, the Poet Laureate has signed up, all sorts of people who either care about science or free speech or journalism. They're all backing the case, and if listeners can also sign up to the petition, that'd be fantastic. It's at senseaboutscience.org, senseaboutscience.org, and the reason why we're keen to get overseas support and why so many overseas people are signing up is because potentially somebody outside of England can end up in an English law court. In fact, not just potentially, it does happen. It's called libel tourism. If somebody wants to confront a journalist, the best thing they can do is bring them to an English law court, because the expenses are so great, the chances are that the journalist will have to back down. So our laws in England are getting other people into trouble, and that's one of the reasons also why we want to change it.
I think it's also really important to emphasise, Simon, and I've had some people comment about this to me, that this is not just about keeping libel laws out of science. This is about reforming the libel laws across the board, and it's much more about free speech, isn't it? Because some people have said to me, well, we shouldn't be an exceptional special group that's almost like special pleading in a sense, saying don't put those laws on us. It's not just about science writers, it's about journalism as a whole.
Yes, you're absolutely right. It's about bloggers, it's about people that write about politics, it's about people that write about anything. I think Sense About Science are keen on the science angle because they're a scientific charity. And also there's sort of been a fashion recently for science being taken to the court. There's a cardiologist in England at the moment called Peter Wilmshurst who's being sued for libel. Ben Goldacre was sued for libel last year when he wrote about a vitamin salesman. So science is sort of topical, and it's a good subject because the issues we're writing about are public interest. They're about child health and about issues that affect the public, health issues. So it's not about gossip, it's not about politics. So it's a good example, which hopefully may lead to a change in the law, but it's not the only example. And as you say, it goes beyond science and it affects journalists, whatever they write about, and as I said earlier, wherever they write about it.
Absolutely. Well, Simon, we're very much looking forward to having you in Australia as a guest of the Adelaide Festival of Ideas. Now, you're doing a lecture in Adelaide on the 12th of July, and then you'll be popping over to Sydney to give a special lecture on the 15th of July. Listeners can...
Yeah, I mean, just on the Adelaide, I think I'm giving about, I think I'm taking part in 3 different panels. I think my impression is that the panel sessions are very much sort of brainstorming of ideas. So we'll be looking at evolution in a general sense, so where do big ideas come from. We'll be looking at sort of drugs and pharmaceuticals in one session, and then I'll be delivering one lecture in particular on alternative medicine and trickle treatment. And then I'll be coming over to Sydney, which would be great, because I haven't been to Sydney for 4 or 5 years now, and I'm really looking forward to coming back. And be talking about alternative medicine and skepticism again when I get to Sydney.
Well, fantastic. Well, thank you very much for your time today, Simon, and we look very much forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks in Australia.
I'm looking forward to it too. I'll see you soon. Take care.
This is Brian Dunning from Skeptoid.com. Skeptoid is a short weekly podcast taking a critical look at the pseudosciences that infect popular culture. Whenever I'm not locked in the recording studio, I'm listening to The Skeptic Zone.
Yellow there. Welcome to the Token Skeptic Book Review with our first book, 59 Seconds. Think a little, change a lot. You'll be able to see the video of this review next week, featured at www.tokenskeptic.org. Professor Richard Wiseman is based at the University of Hertfordshire in the UK and has gained an international reputation for research into quirky areas of psychology, including deception, humour, luck and the paranormal. The book 59 Seconds, Think a Little, Change a Lot is very appealing. It's only sold in the UK at the moment for about £12. I got mine for £7 via an online site, which worked out at around about $14 Australian. Mine even arrived without a hidden tarantula. In terms of appearance, it weighs in at a solid 358 pages, including the detailed footnotes at the end, has a bright, appealing cover, and is not that dissimilar in construction to his earlier work, Quirkology, the curious science of everyday lives. Peel back that bright cover and you'll discover that 59 Seconds has even more in common with Quirkology. Dr. Wiseman has become rather good at putting as much information as he possibly can into these 2 recent books. Whenever I've talked about his research to others, I usually just recommend Quirkology rather than tracking down every paper he's authored, from psychology of deception to parapsychology to personality and luck and so forth. Now, I originally thought that this was going to be more like 2 of his earlier works, which, funnily enough, are self-help books. Since this is a book that challenges many of the claims of the self-help genre, I guess the best way to beat the fruits is to join them and be tastier and more nutritious. There's the luck factor, which investigated how good and bad luck result from measurable habits. For example, lucky people, by expecting good luck, might expend more efforts in their endeavours, resulting in more success, reinforcing their belief in good luck. There is also Did You Spot the Gorilla? How to recognise hidden opportunities in your life, which applies the metaphor for those priceless ideas and opportunities which seem obvious in hindsight, to one's business life and home. It's the structure of the book which might throw you. Now, this isn't the luck factor or Did You Spot the Gorilla? Whilst every research discussion goes for no more than 5 to 6 pages, there's a 59 seconds or less tip which features nearly every 10 pages or so. That's mixed in with some quizzes, some charts to fill in, a few 4x15-second tips in text boxes, and it's all neatly divided into chapters. It's a very practical book that you're encouraged to write in, much like his earlier 2 self-help books, but it's a lot thicker. I guess the format of a self-help book is one I associate more with a less solid non-fiction research book appearance, but you certainly can't say that you're not getting your money's worth with how much research and activities which are stacked in bunches throughout. Of course, being the professor of the public understanding of psychology in the UK, he has a lot of opportunities to conduct tests and trial them. Many of these appear in the book. Romance Made Simple in Chapter 7, Relationships, drew upon the research done on his Quirkology website, a large-scale online survey that examined the psychology of romantic gestures. Another, in Chapter 2, Persuasion, tested how much money people donate to a perfect charity box, which was done in conjunction with Borders bookstores across the UK. Dr. Wiseman regularly pops out new quizzes, activities and studies online. I wouldn't be surprised if many listeners have also enjoyed his kind of supernatural version of the children's game Where's Wally, or Where's Richard, which was played last month via Twitter and on his blog to try out the psychic abilities of his readers. When reading 59 Seconds, I quite enjoyed discovering how many little tips for happiness or encouraging socialisation have been recognised by myself or others in casual discussion, and are either agreed or disagreed upon by scientific research. For example, episode 115 of the Geologic podcast talked about how socialising whilst walking a dog seems so much easier. There in Chapter 6 on stress, with the heading Pause for Thought, research shows that most researchers acknowledge that one of the most important factors centres on the social benefits of owning a dog. A large body of research has demonstrated that spending time with other people is a major source of happiness and health, and dogs' inadvertent but effective ability to bring people together is likely to play a major role in promoting the well-being of their owners. However, some of the comments did seem a little dubious. In Chapter 9, Parenting, one of the in 59 seconds or less summaries claimed that research shows that people with surnames beginning with a letter towards the start of the alphabet are more successful in life, and traditional names with royal associations are seen as particularly successful and intelligent. Well, I wondered if that was also true across cultures. Some of the research is still being done. A study in Chapter 10 on personality looked at the 2D to 4D ratio of fingers, or the Casanova effect, which was conducted by long distance for Dr. Wiseman using Psychops Jim Underdown on 37 of the best-known leading men and 9 comedians. If the phenomenon is genuine, it might be able to tell us more about the magic X factor, or XY factor, of masculine to feminine psychological and physical abilities. Finally, those of you who follow Richard Wiseman on Twitter or check out his new site for the book at www.59seconds.biz will know that there's additional features that complement the book. There's the 59 Seconds tips, which so far include the power of purchases and glasses and mirrors, one on how buying experiences is better for one's happiness than buying goods, and the influence that tall glasses and a mirror in the kitchen can have on a diet. It's a very clever advertisement for the book, as it foregrounds the useful advice and, as expected, makes clear just how much research went into each of the 59 seconds or less tips. Don't forget that you can see the video version of this book review at my new site www.tokenskeptic.org starting from next week. Oh, and if Dr. Richard Wiseman is listening to this podcast to hear one of the very first reviews of his book online, he might let you know via his website at www.59seconds.biz or on his personal blog at www.richardwiseman.wordpress.com. He might comment how many times he heard me make an allusion to, but never actually said the word banana.
Grain of salt, grain of salt, grain of salt.
Let's all take this with a grain of salt. Here's Eran Segev.
Grain of salt now, grain of salt, you gotta take it with a...
Hello, this is Eran Segev, taking life with a grain of salt. Anybody who actively supports a sports club knows the feeling. The team on the field unites the supporters, often dressed in apparel that identifies them with the team. When the team scores a goal or a try or a six, complete strangers will hug and give each other high fives as if they've known each other since kindergarten. At the end of the game, should supporters encounter supporters of the other team, they will together mock them or engage in friendly or not-so-friendly banter. In some cases, they might engage in physical fighting, no doubt with the aim of convincing the other fans to change their allegiance. This kind of identification with a group is not limited to sports, of course. It can be seen in the pride that people feel about their country, waving flags on national days, and often proclaiming theirs to be the best country in the world. This is the time to pause and say that Australia really is the best country in the world, and to the rest of you I'll say, second place isn't so bad. Examples of group loyalty abound. In most cases, people see loyalty to a group as a positive, a virtue. More importantly, what is seen as disloyalty to a group is frowned upon and often punished in various ways. The examples of sports in national background do not usually involve a moral judgment, but there are many groups that require their members, whether official or unofficial, to share some values or ideas. The most obvious such group is a political party. As a political party is supposed to represent ideology, the expectation might be that as a party's ideology inevitably changes over time, so will voters and members change their allegiance. However, that is rarely the case. Voting patterns in Australia show quite clearly that most people vote for the same party in every election. It would be fair to assume that they are loyal to the party rather than agree with all its policies. In the US, where most people are registered members of a party, there is very little change in party membership, though it is not clear what level of adherence there is to party membership on election days. It is fairly easy to guess how evolution would have made humans prone to group loyalty. Since humans are social animals, being able to rely on support from others, members of the group, is paramount to survival. As humans evolved, it would be surprising if they hadn't evolved a freeloader detection mechanism. Suckers spend a lot of energy on lost causes, so some level of sucker-proofing would have been an important development. With suckers being less common, reciprocity would have become a major factor in who gets the support of the group and who doesn't, and group loyalty would have been born. Of course, this is a simplistic representation of both evolution and group loyalty, but it does provide a broad-brush view of how the tendency could have become part of what it means to be human. In his book Blindness, author José Saramago describes a situation in which people find themselves in separate rooms in an isolated hospital, and as resources become scarce, the different rooms become separate groups that fight each other in a manner that is astonishingly brutal. In the context of fighting for survival, that does not seem so incredible, but Saramago's plot puts the characters in different rooms in a completely arbitrary manner, as all those people are blind and they scramble into rooms without any thought or plan. Many people I know who read the book thought that despite the obviously fictitious plot, the element of loyalty to an arbitrarily formed group was completely realistic. While Blindness is just a novel, the behavior of people living under authoritarian regimes has shown that in the face of pressure to behave as the rest of the group expects one to, most people would comply. While it may be possible to justify blind group loyalty under the Nazi regime, for example, as being the result of fear of retribution, the same cannot be said of the students participating in the third wave teaching experiment by Ron Jones in California in 1969. In that experiment, later depicted in the 1981 movie The Wave, students were arbitrarily split into groups, with one group being put in charge of the other and given free rein to do whatever they wanted to members of the other group. The patterns of behavior were disturbing, as the dominant group mistreated the other group in an extraordinary way. But another obvious development was that both groups quickly became cohesive and developed some internal structures that were unique to each group and helped it create a group identity. Listeners might be intrigued as to what the skeptical angle might be for looking at group loyalty, since it is evidently a natural behavior. My answer would start by saying that there are good reasons to suspect that believing claims made by figures of personal authority to be true, regardless of evidence, is also natural. There are good potential evolutionary explanations for belief in general and faith in particular, and Richard Dawkins claims that religion is a side effect of this evolved trait. Despite faith being almost universal and probably natural, we skeptics do not accept it. We strive to change the way people think, hoping to instill critical thinking in as much of society as possible, even though most of us would recognize that we can only make small steps in that direction. In the same way, the fact that group loyalty is a natural behavior does not mean that it is good or even acceptable to an inquiring mind. In his 1998 article, A Critique of Group Loyalty, philosopher Laurie Colquhoun writes, "In spite of the positive connotations of loyalty, the concept is itself morally neutral, and remaining loyal to a group whose values one does not share is irrational." I couldn't agree more. Moreover, I suggest that as skeptics we should be very suspicious of group behavior or any signs that people behave or make decisions based on what they are supposed to because of their group belonging, because of loyalty to their group. The most obvious cases are, as mentioned earlier, in politics, but we should also be very cautious not to play the game ourselves. Skeptical groups are important to many of us, and I'm not suggesting we harm such groups in order to show we do not participate in the group loyalty game. But if the group we belong to, or the skeptical movement in general, is doing something we do not agree with, it is our duty to follow our own logic and morality rather than those of the group.
Grain of salt, you gotta take it with a...
Join us now for Drinking Skeptically in the Think Tank.
Well, cheers everybody once again in the Think Tank. Hello. Clunk. Glasses are flying everywhere. Here we are in our favourite club once again, just waiting for the bus announcements, because I know that our listeners just love to hear the bus announcements when we're here doing the Think Tank. And also, before we start, is a new feature, a new healing method suggested to us by Darren, who shouted us the drinks last time.
Yes.
He has suggested that if listeners want to send us a little bit of money to cover a round of drinks, we could send them remote healing. You see? We would drink to their health. All right. And we're not sure what to call it. Maybe toastology?
Toastology.
Or something like that. So if you send us via the PayPal button at our www.skepticzone.tv, remote toasting, and say this is for a round of drinks for the Think Tank, we will toast your health, your good luck, or anything else you'd like us to toast. Joining me tonight in the Think Tank in our favourite club is Dr. Rachael.
Hi, Richard.
Hi,
How
Dr.
are you?
Rachael. I'm still getting over this wretched, flu-y, coldy thingy.
I hope you get over it before next week.
I do. I'm flying out to town next week. I should get over it by then. Hello, Dianne.
Hi, how are you, Richard?
Well, I'm still getting over this. We have new Zone member Joanne Benhamu. Hello, Jo.
Hello, Richard.
Good to see you. Thank you for coming along. All the way across town, of course.
Yes, I too have been spending most of the week recovering, as anyone listening to my Twitter feed will know.
And what's your Twitter name?
It's Jo Benhamu.
Spelled?
JOBENHAMU.
Good heavens.
Yes.
The whole alphabet.
I like to make things complicated.
Also joining us tonight is Eran Segev from the famous Grain of Salt.
Hi, Richard.
Hi, Eran. And Zone member Amanda Rose. Hi, Amanda.
Hello.
Now, Amanda, Eran, and I will all be going to Tam next week.
Yippee. And you must be well by then, because otherwise you'll have to find alternative accommodation.
Oh, yes.
I'm not sharing a room with
Sharing
germs.
a room. All right. Oh, I just knocked the microphone. I'm so excited to go to Tam. I'll see what I can do until then. Now, a quick few snippets before we get into the more interesting things. Listener Peter writes to me and says, are you aware that there was a fellow by the name of Richard Saunders, 1613 to 1692, who was a famous astrologer and mole mapper? Mole mapper, you see.
When you say mole mapper, Richard, what do you mean? Would you care to extrapolate on that, please?
This is where you remove your shirt and you map the moles on your skin.
And what do you deduce from that?
Heaven knows.
Is that like a
Do
sort
you
of
map them
primitive
to the stars or something? Like
connect the dots?
Yeah, connect the dots. Maybe that's right. So there we are.
Actually, you know, this
Mole
makes
mapper.
exactly as much sense as iridology. So perhaps it's just...
Or phrenology, possibly.
Yeah.
Feeling the lumps on your head
Yeah.
or the holes in your head.
Just possibly some diagnostic mechanism.
Now, another listener, Mordrin, writes and asks a question maybe you, Dr. H, could answer briefly. Asks about PubMed asks about PubMed and Google Scholar search engine. Are you familiar with that? Can you give our listeners a quick overview of that?
Oh, well, PubMed is the National Institute of Health list of biological articles that have been published in the peer-reviewed literature, and it mostly covers life sciences. So Joe knows about it too. So Joe and I use it all the time in our work. If you want to search for information that's been peer-review published, then you would usually go to PubMed first and type in a topic or an author's name. And Google Scholar Search also picks up articles from PubMed.
From PubMed?
Yes, it does.
So they're both good, reliable sources, you'd say?
Well,
they're reliable as the information that you come up with from them. So,
yeah.
I mean, they're much like any database. There are hundreds of databases out there that you can access peer-reviewed articles. Whether it's there's Ovid and CINAHL, Medline, and Google's one that's probably the most accessible to people because so many people use Google and it's easy for them to get to. The problem with a lot of those databases, though, is that you can find an article that you want, but these days most people tend to look for things online primarily, and a lot of the time to actually access the articles you often need to be a paying member. So often you'd need to be, if you work in hospital or some sort of medical area, you may get free access through your institution, but if you are just an individual out there who wants to access the articles, it can be quite difficult, unless you just pick yourself up and go off to your library with your little reference and go and actually find the article in the library itself. So, yeah.
But the alternative thing you can do to that, Joe, is you can Twitter the article you want, and you'll probably get it in about a minute from somebody across the world who has
access.
So this happened to you today, didn't it, or yesterday?
No, this happened to me. Well, actually, it did happen to me yesterday, but it happened to me a week and a half ago as well when I was looking for the Australian Pharmacy Journal article about why homeopathy works. And Scott from Canada, who writes the blog Science-Based Pharmacy, wrote to me and said, do you have the article? And my university subscribes to that particular journal, but they are about 2 months behind in getting up to date online, the journal. So I tweeted it and somebody sent it to me on email.
Just really quick. I mean, Twitter is
so
fantastic.
Quickly.
I mean, I love Twitter. Well, a lot of people regard it as a waste of time, but for an information source, if you need help or information on something, Twitter is fantastic. Now, your Twitter name is Dr. Rachie.
It is, yeah.
Your Twitter name is?
Dianne_.
Dianne_. We've heard your Twitter name.
Eran Segev, I believe.
Eran Segev. And you are?
I'm Floppy-Eared Mule.
Floppy-Eared Mule on Twitter. And I'm just Skeptic Zone. So Twitter is fantastic.
Can I give a shout-out, Richard, to the people that helped me yesterday?
Yeah.
Because I was actually called up by a journalist who is looking to do a story on the BCA Simon Singh chiropractic.
Which we'll get to in a moment.
We'll get to that in a moment, yeah. And the journalist was after the original Guardian article that appeared in August 2008, which of course has now been pulled. And I sent out a call on Twitter, and I think within about maybe a minute, which was the time it took me to recheck and refresh, I had about 12 people that had sent me links and or PDFs and or emails. So thanks very much to all those people that did that, because that means that we can get it out to the Australian media, which is fantastic.
There's very interesting things happening there. And a couple of other quick items. Those people who listen to the 365 Days of Astronomy podcast, the one that George Harab sings the theme to.
And you talk about on Australian television?
And I mention on Australian television subtly when I can.
Yes.
Our reporter Kylie Sturgess. In fact, as we're recording on the 1st of the think tank's being recorded on the 1st of July, and her episode is out today. So you can listen to Kylie Sturgess on the 365 Days of Astronomy podcast, which also reminds me Dr. Rachie and myself are trying to organise ourselves to get over to Perth.
We are, yes.
In early August.
August, yeah.
To speak at the Secular Week over there at the university.
Of Western Australia. There are 5 unis in Perth, so University of Western Australia.
And I think it's all going very well. We're just trying to get ourselves a little bit of funding to cover airfares. I mean, we're not going to get paid, obviously, for talking or being there or anything like that, but we just need to get there. So if anybody's in Perth and would like to help us, you can contact Kylie via our website, or you can happily donate to the Skeptic Zone, and that will help us too.
Yeah, which it'd be great to go and do some lectures in Perth.
We're really looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Really want to hope that we can do this.
After Melbourne, which was so successful.
Fantastic. All right, I'm going to throw open the floodgates to you, first of all, Dr. H, with your item of news.
Well, yes, I think some people may have heard about this, but we are very, very proud at the Zone to announce that we have managed to wrangle Simon Singh to come to Sydney. He's going to be giving a lecture, a public lecture, on the 15th of July at the Seymour Centre in Sydney. And that is hosted by Sydney Ideas, but Simon has been brought to Australia by the Adelaide Festival of Ideas. So if you're in Adelaide, he's also doing a seminar, as he mentioned earlier in his interview, on the Sunday the 12th, and he's doing a couple of panels throughout the weekend as well. But if you are in Sydney and you want to come to the lecture, if you go to the website, just do a search for Sydney Ideas and Simon Singh, and you can get a special Skeptics discount price for tickets. Normal price is $20, and you can get them for $10. If you go to the website and type in the promotional code Skeptics09...
Is that Skeptics with
a
K
K
and an S on the end?
Yes, Skeptics09 with a K. You can get tickets for $10. Yeah, so we're very excited that Simon's been able to come to Sydney. So
that's great, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it was nice to it was nice that you were able to interview him, that our listeners would have heard earlier in the show. And actually, what you didn't hear was I was sitting on producing that in the background. That was a great interview.
Yeah,
I really enjoyed
it was
that.
good. Yeah. So a lot of his talk is going to be about trickle treatment. In fact, he's going to do a lot of talk about alternative medicine and the alternative medicine modalities that he addressed in the book Trickle Treatment.
Great book.
Yeah.
Fantastic book.
I mean, all his books are great.
Oh, I read the code book and I couldn't put it down.
Yeah.
Seriously, I was up all night. It's a brilliant way to learn all about codes and ciphers. He explains it so well. And the Enigma machine from the Second World War.
Yep.
You read Simon's book and you understand how the bloody things work. He's a really good writer.
Well, he's actually getting some really big media interest in Australia because of this tour, actually. And I think it's going to really put the whole BCA libel case in the spotlight in Australia, which I think is really good because
we know all about it, but the general public...
the general public don't. And in fact, I was talking to a journalist a couple of days ago about chiropractic in general, and he said to me, well, most people in the Australian public don't know it's quackery. And although not all of it is quackery, the bits where they say they can cure deafness and colic and things like that in children is potentially and allegedly quackery. Notice what I said there, listeners.
Well done.
Allegedly.
Some people have said.
Some people may have said. There is some suggestion.
But I think you can say that there's no evidence for it, can't you?
You can say
That's
that there's no
libelous.
evidence.
Well, I've heard some people have allegedly said that. Anyway, go on.
But interestingly, in Australia, and I don't know if it's the same in other parts of the world, our private health funds cover things like that. They cover chiropractic as well as acupuncture and some sort of, aromatherapies and things like that.
I know.
Well,
I tried to remove the cover from mine. I actually called my health fund and tried to remove cover for unproven modality. I basically said I'm not interested in paying for anything that's unproven.
Yeah.
I want that removed. And it's just not possible.
Not an option.
No.
Well, it's interesting because just recently a health private health provider in this country has put up ads, I don't know if you've seen them, Joe, that say you can modify your cover now to choose whether you want less alternative therapies and more conventional.
Not mine.
So maybe the tide's turning a little bit. Maybe there have been more people like yourself ringing up and saying, I'm not paying for this nonsense.
I wondered whether... I saw those ads actually as well, and I noted that they specifically said, the person in the ad said, I would like less alternative therapies and more,
optical or something.
Optical therapy or physiotherapy.
Have you seen that ad for Lipton tea?
Yes.
Where they're in the alternative salon.
It's
and
for green tea.
This is green tea.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, it's better than the mud we're slapping on your face from our backyard. It doesn't work.
That's actually a really funny ad.
Lipton green tea. Oh, green tea. I've heard this is really good for you. Just as well, because our treatments have no therapeutic benefit whatsoever. Of course, I'm only here so I can boast about it to the girls at tennis.
So you'd be looking forward to forking out $150 for me to slop mud all over you?
Well, it is so fabulously exclusive.
Exclusively from our very own backyard.
Now that's refreshing and naturally rich in antioxidants. Lipton tea can do that.
That's your rant. Now, Joe has an old rant, which is not really a rant.
Well, no, it's not really a rant.
What have you got there, Joe?
But it's a segue, I believe.
It's a segue.
It's a really interesting little tidbit that I came across today while I was looking up. Funnily enough, I was actually looking up something to do with homeopathy and malaria because I'd come across a case. It was actually a weird little connection about a woman who had suffered some severe consequences of not taking prophylactic treatment for malaria prior to travelling to, I think it was Togo. Very small.
In Africa, right?
Yeah. Sorry if I get the name of that country wrong. But she suffered, ended up in ICU for months and months and months with severe, consequences of untreated malaria because she'd taken homeopathic remedies. And in the process of looking this all up, I came across this really interesting little piece from it's from 1851, and it's from I think it's the London Journal of Medicine. And if
1851,
1851,
radio, yeah,
1851. And if you'll bear with me, I'll read you a little snippet of it because it's quite astounding. And it's from a doctor by the name of Dr. Cormack, I think. Let me just find his name. Where's it from? Anyway, Dr. Cormack. And it's regarding the relations with homeopathy. To the editor of the Provincial Medical and Surgical Journal, July 29th, 1851. And Dr. Cormack says, to adopt resolutions setting forth that the homeopathic dogma and the doctrine of infinitesimal doses have no truthful basis and are, in fact, mere nonsensical delusions, may be quite proper, inasmuch as some honest but weak and undisciplined minds have been seduced by the hardy assertions and false reasoning by which these errors have been supported. But something more is required, if it be true, as I think it is, that this fashionable quackery is so susceptible of adaptation to the most contradictory prejudices of shallow men and women as to have become a sort of protean deceit, able to lure lucre by every imaginable wile from the sick and the silly. I'll just
from the sick and the silly.
I'll just let Dr. Rachel compose herself. The worst part of homeopathy is, in my opinion, the dishonesty of the majority of those who live by it. When patients are once secured, they are, I think, very rarely treated in accordance with the principles of Hahnemann, but are retained by the combination of every current medical novelty, which may at the time be most in favour with the moneyed throng of quack fanciers.
Attention please, members and guests, it is now 9:25 p.m. and in 5 minutes' time all persons under the age of 18 must be escorted from the premises. Thank you.
Well, it's not a bus announcement.
I was hoping for a bus announcement. He then continues, if homeopathy were honestly practised, it might be amicably dealt with, but as it is truly a combination of any and every available charlatanic trick, it cannot be effectively opposed as a distinct medical heresy, and therefore all that remains for us as men of science and men of integrity is to give notice that we exclude from all professional intercourse practitioners who are in any way engaged in using or upholding a system which we think bears upon its very face fraud as well as absurdity.
Yay. Wow.
I find it terribly depressing.
I find it terribly depressing as
150 years have passed and nothing has changed.
Nothing.
Iran.
Yeah, I've been trying to look into good pharmacies for a while. So whenever I go past a pharmacy, I go in and have a look and see whether they sell any quackery, any vitamins, or definitely if they sell anything that's with some medical claim. And I make a list of those who don't. Now, I only found one place that actually doesn't sell anything that's not pharmaceutical, or just the stuff like toothpaste and anything, no vitamins and stuff like that. Only one place, but I found about 3 or 4 places that do not sell anything that has medical claims attached to it without evidence. And I thought it might be a good idea to make a public list of these places.
Oh, yeah.
And so if listeners know of such places, maybe they could send us the details, and we'll publish it somewhere. We'll have to probably think about where we do it and what forum, but probably Twitter it tonight. See if
Twitter it too. If listeners go to our contact page at skepticzone.tv, you'll find Eran's email. Oh yes, Eran at skepticzone.tv, and they can send you. What they find. That'd be fantastic.
Anything, and anywhere in the world as well, because the idea is, to just give these people who do the right thing a bit of a boost.
What a good idea. What a good idea.
Yeah, great.
Thanks for that, Eran. Well, how exciting. Amanda and Eran off to Tam next week.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
This time next week.
We'll
be sitting in
right.
row something in the A380.
Joe and I will take over, don't worry about that. And don't mention the A380 in front
A380.
Don't mention the A380.
Airbus A380.
I'll be in Vegas.
The downside is it's a Qantas one.
Which means it might get a hole in the back.
But we love Qantas. We love all
I'm
airlines.
a Qantas frequent flyer.
Airlines are good.
Have the best safety record in the world.
They do. Qantas are fantastic. I would fly with Qantas anytime, anywhere. I think they're the best airline, and my address is...
I must say that flying with them is not the problem, but if you're trying to get customer service...
That's another matter entirely.
You should Twitter that, and they'll sort it out. Happened to Adam Savage this week on Twitter. Did you hear about that?
No.
He had a bill from a particular telco, AT&T, for, how much was it, $100,000 or something?
Many dollars.
And he tweeted that and said, this is ridiculous, and everyone retweeted it, and they eventually called him and said, oh, don't worry about that, and cancelled the bill.
I should do that. I got a huge gas bill.
Yeah, but that may be justified.
Sorry. I didn't realise that it had to be unjustified.
Yeah, generally speaking.
No, because I'm not happy with it. That's not good enough.
Sit in the dark for a while, okay?
I'm going home to look at my Twitter. Amanda, thank you very much for being with us tonight. Eran, thank you. Joe, thank you.
You guys enjoy your trip. We won't miss you.
Dianne and Dr. H. Cheers, everyone.
Cheers.
No muscle announcements.
Thank you for joining us here today for the Skeptic Zone. And don't forget, you can contribute to the Perth tour of the Skeptic Zone with Richard Saunders and Dr. Rachael Dunlop at the University of Western Australia in early August. Check out the site at www.skepticzone.tv and also our blog at www.skepticzone.wordpress.com. We will feature more news and details as it comes to hand, but we can really appreciate some donations just by clicking on the PayPal button or contacting us on the site. Join us again next week when we talk to Shane Killian, yes, he of the Bogosity videos, and Richard pays a visit to the Australian Museum in Sydney. Thanks and stay skeptical.
You've been listening to the Skeptic Zone. Visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for comments, contacts, and extra video reports.
The Skeptic Zone.